Hey, good morning, everyone. Welcome to JNUC Day 2. Hopefully everyone had some good sessions this morning. Didn't stay out too late last night. Yeah, looking forward to the rest of the day and the JNUC party tonight. It should be a good time. But for right now, the exciting thing is we get to hear from Richard talking a little bit about iOS, Okta, and Entra with Jamf setup. And you told me a little bit ago that you've done things with Jamf setup that I would be afraid to see, basically, right? Not afraid, but
we'll get to that.
We'll get to that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Give it up for Richard.
Hello, everyone. How are you all doing today? Who else is first time in Tennessee? Most of the hands in the room. Cool. Me too. Right. So yeah, my name is Richard Purvis. Don't let the accent fool you. I'm based out in California. I am my job title is Senior macOS Engineer. I do, as you'll see from this talk, I do quite a bit more than that. And I work for a company called The RealReal. And if you've never heard of The RealReal, what we are is a marketplace for luxury good consignment. So we encourage the circular economy. We want to encourage reuse. We have an environmentally friendly message. We have online presence. We have retail store presence. And we have huge warehouse facilities, just to give you an idea of the kind of the scope of the operation that we've got. Yes, we want people to consign stuff through us that they maybe don't want anymore. We handle most luxury goods. The watch guys keep wanting my watch. No, they can't have it. And that's the company, and that's what we do. So with that said.
Danger! Warning! Danger! Warning! Warning!
Will you stop the clatter, you bubble-headed booby?
I'm going to throw lots of Lost in Space references in this thing because the button actually worked the second time there. There is a lot of tech talk in this presentation. This is going to be quite technically heavy. The last time I timed this, I pretty much ran out of time. So if I'm going a bit too quick, tell me. But we'll try and get this done. Find me throughout the conference. I have a brain date tomorrow. There might be a slot left. Somebody might have grabbed it. I don't know. You can find me on the Mac admin Slack. My handle there is Franton. And anyone who's been on the Slack has probably seen me around a bit, especially in the JNUC channels and the Jamf admin channels and that kind of stuff. There's a QR code there, and there's a link to my GitHub. I will publish the slides from this talk when I get back home. That will be this weekend. That link doesn't work, but at the minute, there is nothing there to download. That will be this weekend. So don't worry. These slides will become available. I saw a few people grabbing photos. Yeah, OK, we still got people over there grabbing photos. Has everybody made a note of this who wants to make a note of it? See a few thumbs up. Yeah, all good? Cool. So there was a guy in computing history called Ted Nelson. This is a very clever man. He is an IT pioneer. He coined hypertext in the 1960s. So if you ever wonder where the term hypertext came from, it's him. And he said, a user interface should be so simple that a beginner in an emergency can understand it within 10 seconds. I think 10 seconds is a little optimistic. 30 seconds is about what I aim for. But he also said, making things easy is hard. Yes. So just to show you what it's like, we are now going to do a device demo build. And I pre-recorded this one. So when we build an iPad or an iPhone, we run it. Everything that we have is in Apple Business Manager. When you run it through the ABM and the ADE process, every single device comes up with a screen that looks like this. You have self-service. You have Jamf setup. There's a couple of IT tools on there. The settings in the bottom. It is highly restricted. You cannot sideload apps onto it. And this is what everybody is presented with. And also, the desktop background is our warning message that this is our device in case the devices get stolen. Contact number, and obviously reference to our device, acceptable device use policies. And I'm just going to press the button again. And what we'll do is we'll now run through the setup demo. And now I have to look at that screen because that screen's not live. So we just clicked on Jamf setup, and we click on sign in. And there's the prompt that I can't skip. And uh-oh, that's an Okta prompt. OK. So I am now going to spend time typing in my username, and then I've obfuscated my password. So it doesn't look like it's doing something, but trust me, it is. And then according to our Okta policies, the thing that's going to happen after I type in my password is it's going to ask me for MFA, and I'm going to, in this case, use Okta Verify to do that. It's going to ask me, do I trust therealreal.com? Well, of course I do. I work there. Am I trying to sign into Jamf setup? Of course I am. I just click the button. I can't get rid of those two things. You'll notice that went straight through. It picked the IT profile, and now it's got my details on it. And now what's going to happen is this is the sped up version of the build process, because we don't have like 15 minutes to wait. You'll notice the background has changed. You'll notice the apps are coming down. And in typical iOS fashion, they come down in any old order. And we just wait for those things to go through. And in a minute, I'm going to swipe left and cancel the passcode prompt policy. And then done. It did the home screen right at the end. That is now a finished device. It's like, well, that's pretty cool. So what do we just see? So that was Okta all through Jamf Setup. Anyone who's ever read the Jamf Setup guides knows that it doesn't have anything for Okta in there. It has plenty of stuff for Entra, but not for Okta. We minimized the amount of prompting. We didn't get rid of it completely. Some of it is not skippable. We have automated assignment of a device based upon user login. The device then builds and configures itself. Restrictions, policies, the works. But Jamf Setup doesn't support Okta. That's OK. We'll get to that. So where do you start? Well, you start with Okta rules. And you use Okta rules to populate Okta groups. So in this particular case, I have a group called Jamf Production iOS IT. There's a very simple Okta rule that basically says that anybody who's in a specific user department or whatever you want to use that's in your Okta environment, if the user's part of this, then assign it to a group called Jamf Production iOS IT. OK? Seems fairly simple so far. I'm about to show you something that makes most people have major headaches. This is a complex example. Our friend Okta expression language. So when you do a system like this, what you need to build in is a catch-all profile. And the catch-all profile exists for people who are not assigned to any other device role. And because Okta expression language works backwards from the way that most languages work, the way it works is, look at the bit right at the end, and it says, and is a member of any group. Now, I've blanked out the ID numbers for obvious reasons. But what you're saying there is, am I a member of all contractors or all employees? That's effectively what that bit at the end means. The bit at the beginning that has the exclamation mark in front of it, is member of group, that is a list of all of the ID numbers of all of the other build groups that you may have. So what you're effectively saying with this is, you are an actual user of the company, you're an employee, you're a contractor, but you're not a member of any of those groups. Yes, Okta makes you do expression language backwards compared to what most people are used to. And what that means is if you do it that way, you don't catch things like service accounts unless you deliberately put them in the right place. The reason for using the ID numbers of the Okta groups, because the other choice is you do the Okta group name, is let's say somebody somewhere on the Okta side wants to do a naming scheme change on group names. The ID numbers never change. Group names might. If you put in group names and somebody changes the name of these things, this will break. So this is done at the expense, it's done for reliability at the expense of readability. But either way, that works. So somebody who isn't assigned a device profile gets put into the holding pattern, basically. OK. Now for the back-end magic. How does this tie in? So the way that we have done this is, because Okta is our primary IDP and it is our source of truth, we federated Okta to Entra. So all of the user accounts come through that mechanism. All the accounts are Okta. All Entra does is forwards it off to Okta for authentication and MFA policy. And that was done for a different reason. I just piggybacked on that, so I can't claim credit for any of that. Whenever there's a change to a user or a group, especially if you're doing things with like Okta rule sets, because those groups are effectively dynamic at that point, Okta workflows. And our identity team crafted a set of Okta workflows that look for changes in any of these groups, and in fact, all the groups, and then replicates it all off to Entra. So Entra is effectively a carbon copy clone within a few minutes of all the users and all the groups that exist in Okta. Cool. The sync is one way. So, like I say, Okta's going to be a source of truth, and you're going to do everything through that.
That is all right, Will Robinson. I do not mind weather. Better get Dr. Smith inside before he melts.
Yes, and that's what I felt like too. So, there's some funky stuff to do with Entra that we're now going to deal with. And the first one is this thing called Home Realm Discovery. And it looks like that window there with the sign-in prompt. And for those people who've seen this before, what that prompt is doing is it's checking for your domain. It's not checking to see if the actual address that you're typing in is legit. It's just checking to see what's after the @ So, press the button again. In testing, I was able to put anything in this screen. I was happily testing with fake @ and it was going through. I then decided to test with my own personal domain name, because I do have a Microsoft account somewhere. And oh yeah, that broke things quite nicely. So this is great if you've got like a federated environment, multiple domains, but we don't. So this is just an extra prompt that we don't need. However, there is a solution. There is a function called auto acceleration. And when you set that up, it bypasses that. So it means, as you saw in the initial video, it goes straight through to the authentication prompt. Finding this stuff out was not fun. Because when I was going through Microsoft's documentation, you kind of have to know what things are called in order to find them. And if you don't know what it's called, that's difficult. So Home Realm Discovery, that's what you look for. If you have Entra admins, get them to do this, because they're going to have to do this through PowerShell. You can't do this through the GUI at the time of this talk and when I made these slides. So get them to do it, because they know more than I do. And my fun bit is Microsoft keeps changing how this is done. So I did actually have a slide in here about how we did it originally, and it's all gone. It doesn't work. So warning, as I was finishing up these slides, yes, I did have them completed that early. Yeah, got this nice little warning that came out, and it basically says the Microsoft Graph PowerShell to interact with Entra ID is gonna stop working, because that's the old Azure tools. This came out of when they renamed to Entra. So the new Entra tools are what you want to use. The old stuff kind of works, but again, talk to your Entra admins. If you are your Entra admins, you probably know this stuff already. Okay. Now we get to the meat and potatoes. So we've got our Okta groups. How are we going to make this work with Jamf setup? Now, I'm going to leave a few bits out here, so I do apologize. A lot of this stuff is in Jamf's own documentation for Jamf setup. So I'm going to assume that you have Jamf setup already in place on your Entra environment. What we now need is app roles. And these do define what configuration your device is going to get. As you saw in the video at the beginning, that was IT. Okay? Eventually, those roles go into an extension attribute in Jamf. So this is where you define the name of what your various device roles are going to be. And the great fun is that thanks to certain Microsoft internal restrictions, you can't have spaces in the names. So you're either clumping everything together, but you can use full stops periods to space things out. And that's the convention that we've gone with. So let's have a look at the app itself inside Entra. Jamf setup. So you've got the section on the side that says app roles, and you go in here, and you have a display name, and you have a value. And I put in the description so that I know what I'm on about if ever I'm coming back to this. And you can see there we've got one there that's called fgw.books. And then we've got one there that's called catch-all. So that shows you the differences in how you do the names. So you create your app rules here. And it's literally just create that app button at the top, and then just keep going through that one by one until you've got all the app rules that you want. So like I say, we're going to match the user groups we sync to the device roles. This is where it gets complex. You can do a single group to a single role. But you can also do a single group to multiple roles. Or you can do multiple groups to a single role. And every combination in between. So at this point, it is possible to tie yourself in a great amount of knots. But it is flexible for more complex environments. So you just be aware and keep good documentation. And the way it works is, yeah, we've got the user and groups page also on Jamf setup. This is in a slightly different section to where we were before. What you can see here is there's your groups. These are the ones that synced across from Okta. You've got all the names. Notice the three at the bottom. That's a iPad setup. That is a generic setup, and you can see that's going to different roles, whereas some of these other ones are only going to single ones, like the catch-all is going to catch-all, retail standards, going wherever. Yeah. So, like I say, group to role. So, to recap, we have Okta federated to Entra. The users are populated into your various Okta groups via rule sets so that they're dynamic. We have multiple sets of people, and they can sync to either one group or many groups. We have the home realm discovery disabled. Oops, got ahead of myself, looking at the wrong slide there. App roles created in the Jamf Setup Entra app. The user groups are synced. And multiple groups can sync from one role, many roles, to one group or many groups, depending on your own needs. Cool. Everybody with me so far? There's like the shocked silence from the audience. I'm just going to have a sip of this real quick. Thank you to our external sponsor for this. That's an inside Jamf joke for anybody who's watching on YouTube. Yeah. So the long story short is we just mapped Okta users to specific device builds. That's what all of that you've just seen has achieved. OK, home run. We're actually going to talk about some Jamf stuff finally. We're going to grab the Jamf setup app registration details. So in Jamf setup, you have, on Entra, you actually have the application client ID, and you have the directory tenant ID. These are the two things that you need. You don't need the object ID. How you make this work is you go into Jamf, and you go into the mobile app configuration for the Jamf setup app itself. And the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to change the login type to Entra. Again, there's good documentation on Jamf's own site for this. I highly suggest that you follow that. The next two bits is the application ID needs to go in this bit that says client ID. Yeah, that causes some confusion because the names don't quite match, but like I say. And then the next thing is you take your tenant ID and you paste it on the end of that line there. So it's HTTPS login Microsoft, microsoftonline.com, and then the tenant ID. So this then ties the app to your Entra tenant. OK?
Oh, the pain, the pain.
Yes, never have I been so in tune with Dr. Smith. OK. Warning, Will Robinson, warning. There is a bug in Jamf setup that I discovered that apparently caused some consternation within Jamf itself. So Jamf setup, most people use this not tied to Entra. They normally just have a giant list of device builds, and then you just pick one and off you go. And all of that is in the managed app config. And what I discovered when doing any of this with Entra is if you don't include some or all of these in the managed app config, if you have, say, one entry in there, and you have a user that has 2 or 3 or more roles assigned from Entra, what initially comes up is only the first entry. And you have to close the app and reload it to get the rest of them to display. So that was the bug I ended up reporting. My workaround for this, oh yeah, whoops, I'd gone a bit far. Close and reload the app. And the workaround for this is to put every single device role you've got as though you were building it as a giant list. So in the managed app config there, and I've got most of them blocked out for obvious reasons, yeah, you put them all in there as though you were building a giant list. And then if people have got 5 roles assigned that they can pick from, they can see all 5. So whatever that bug is, it's tied to how many entries are in that list. And I just found that the best practice is to basically put everything in there. So if in some unreasonable set of circumstances somebody can see everything, they will see everything rather than just a chunk of it. Okay. Jamf return to service. I love Jamf return to service. Our retail people really love Jamf return to service because it means they don't have to return iPads to us. They just hit the button, watch the thing nuke itself. And because they're on the corporate network, it just goes straight through. We don't have to get IT involved to set them going through all the setup assistant and all that kind of stuff. So relies on API role for authentication in Jamf. If you're not using API users and roles, I highly recommend that you move to it. A little bit more complex, but definitely more secure and definitely the way forward. Press the button again. OK. Well, lucky, we have a Wi-Fi profile that doesn't have anything crazy or complicated on it for corporate network, and in some cases, corporate networks. You need the Wi-Fi profile ID number as well as your API client and secret. So this will effectively, as Apple does it, it will take that Wi-Fi profile, and through the reset process, it will supply the device with the correct Wi-Fi credentials, which is one of the reasons why it's so awesome, because it just auto-connects and blasts through. There is a PDF guide that I used. Jamf kindly supplied that. This is kind of an unsupported app. They provide it, but it's not a fully fledged app yet. I'm using it because it's really, really useful. The PDF guide meant that while I was having a conversation with Marcus Ransom, I actually had this thing up and running in 2 hours. And Marcus didn't actually have to do much. There are some caveats. It doesn't work with anything that's iOS 16 and below. You need to be on iOS 17 or later for this to work, because the iOS itself just doesn't support it. If you have 802.1x Wi-Fi, that's reliant on either certificate credentials, and even worse again, username and password credentials, this thing doesn't work. It doesn't want to know. That's a long-standing limitation with all of Apple's products. If you have pre-stage enrollment customizations, like you have a break in the middle, that blocks this working as well. That's why at the very beginning, we had the legal message and this is property of TRR message as the desktop background rather than as enrollment customization. So that breaks this. So we had to take that one out so this thing could straight shoot all the way through. As long as you've got that, then you can do something like this. There's Jamf Reset at the top. That basically goes to everything. Those two, by the way, those 2 mobile device groups is like all iPads and all iPhones. So I'm not trying to deploy this to Apple TVs. Same deal with Jamf Setup at the bottom. And you'll notice that there's just a quick exception on Jamf Return to Service, and it basically says anything less than iOS 17 excluded. This is not difficult. Absolutely not difficult. OK. Managed app config. A little bit more difficult, but not much. You want the client ID and the client secret that you got from Jamf when you set up the API roles. And just below that, it says Wi-Fi config profile ID, and in this case, it's a number called 12. This will vary depending on how you set up your Wi-Fi profile and when you set up your Wi-Fi profile. Because as you know, Jamf ID numbers just constantly increment the more policies and your profiles and stuff like that you do. And the rest of that is a copy and paste straight from the documentation. Like I said, under 2 hours. So how do we do the rest of Jamf? Well, unfortunately, I forgot to do Jamf Reset. But trust me, after you've done everything else, Jamf reset's easy. Again, Jamf's got really, really good documentation online about how to set that up. And it requires all the same details that we showed before in this talk. Okay, Jamf itself. Well, we need a text entry extension attribute for all iOS devices. This is how it's going to work. All of these roles that we've seen before are going to go in that extension attribute. Because Jamf setup takes the authenticated username and places that into the device record. So we know what users got what device, which is cool. And then it takes that role and it puts that into the extension attribute. So when you look at an example device that I've blocked some of the data out, you can see that I've built that device, it hasn't got the device, and it's got the device role. So it's got my email address and it's got that role. And then the next time the device inventories, it will populate up the user and location field if you've got all of that hooked up as well. So yeah, you're going to know where this stuff is. Smart groups. This is the real meat and potatoes of the Jamf config itself. So every single device role that you create, you are going to need a smart group for. And optional. If you're going to do home screen profiles, some of you may not. Some of you may want a more rigid user experience. You're going to need another one for that. We'll get onto the technical reasons why that's necessary later. You can't just throw everything off the roll. And what you're going to do is that role profile at the top, you're going to scope that to all of your profiles, your restriction profiles, everything. You're going to scope it to any apps, any books, anything you want. This is going to control exactly what's going on. This is what a smart device group looks like. It's the extension attribute equals, excuse me, whatever the name of the role is. Simple, huh? Home screen, not so simple. Let's explain what's going on here. So again, device role is equal to IT, but we're also looking for specific app store names. Now, I got to credit a guy called Eric Boyd for tipping me off about this one, because this one drove me mad. Bless you, Eric. What happens is, if you are doing home profiles that have folders in there, you have to make sure that you have at least one app per folder already installed on the device before you hit it with the home screen profile. If you don't, it does random effects. It'll get it mostly right. It might even occasionally, under certain race conditions, get it completely right, but it probably won't, and you'll probably end up with spurious icons all over the place. So you check for anything that's in a folder, and you make sure it's on, and once it's there, then the home folder profile will then kick in properly, and you'll have a consistent user experience. That's why if you cast your mind back to the device demo, it was deploying all of the apps, it got all the way to the end, and then it did the home screen. That is what that is for. So let's take a look at an example of an app that you could configure. This is TestFlight. It's configured to 2 device groups, and it's just a standard App Store app. I'm not going to go into the details of how you configure that. I will say that these are an example of the groups that you would attach to an app. And the more device groups that you attach to the app, the more devices then get the app. So everything's done through the smart group. And before I end, I will say one of the cool things that you can do with this is if the profile on the device is wrong for whatever reason, you don't have to wipe the device. You can go into the extension attribute, change the name of it, hit save, and then watch as the device reconfigures itself right in front of you because it changes smart group membership. So you can watch a device like uninstall half of its apps, leave the ones it's supposed to have, and then put everything else back, change desktop wallpapers, the works. It's really, really effective for that because a lot of people have to basically wipe and redo it to do a config change. So we have a get out of jail free card for that. And with that,
3, 2, 1, 0.
Ignition. Power.
there you go, slowest spaceship takeoff in history. And with that, thank you very much. Oh, look, we've got 15 minutes. We do have time for a Q&A. The gentleman at the back has got the microphone. So if you put your hands up, he will come to you. Or if you want to escape from my monotonous voice, you can. I'd like to point people out, but I can't actually see past these lights.
Hey, great presentation.
Thank you.
Super informative. Question about so we just use Entra,
Yeah.
an authenticator app to authenticate to our resources. After every wipe, though, that would be something that I would have to manually sign back into, I guess. For
If you completely wipe the device, then yes, you are either you're probably going to have to go through the setup to do it. That is kind of the safest method. There are others, but I'll not get into them here. You can manually configure things in the Jamf inventory record if you're just testing.
That was my question. Is there a way to preserve those credentials after the wipe? So if I have like devices off-site or out of town, I wouldn't have to manually.
That is a Jamf Pro configuration option about clearing inventory records on re-enrollment, and you will have to experiment with that.
Okay.
But we are set to clear all those things because generally speaking, when we get devices back, they're not going back to the same person. Cool. Anybody else?
In your presentation, you're doing Okta to Entra, Entra to Jamf.
Correct.
Have you done testing or seen any documentation of just Okta directly to Jamf setup and cutting out Entra out of the middle?
There isn't any because there's no official support for Jamf setup direct to Okta.
Good to know.
If you want that, you're going to want Jamf Connect. It does that, the Okta direct to Jamf.
Yeah, but I'm not. That's great for macOS, but I'm not sure it does it for iOS. I know that there's a potential replacement for Jamf setup maybe coming. I just got told about that like 5 minutes before this talk. I don't quite know what's going on with that yet, but there may be something. I don't know.
Anyway, my question was,
Yeah.
Does this assume Entra, like the full Entra license?
No,
for
because
users, or they're
that's the
free?
beautiful thing when you federate Entra off to Okta so that it's doing Okta, it's basically passing everything to Okta. It is our understanding, and please check with your Microsoft rep. Do not take me as complete verbatim on this. Please check. But yeah, we don't get charged for user licenses for that because technically speaking, the accounts is a placeholder rather than a full account.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
Again, please double check all licensing questions with your Microsoft rep. You do not want to be in trouble with Microsoft. The directorate will disavow all knowledge.
With the extension attributes pulling from Entra, what were you having, I guess, which section of Jamf were you having pull the attributes from Entra to populate your
Okay, so so basically it goes Entra through Jamf setup to Jamf. Jamf Pro doesn't directly pull Entra, if that's how I understand your question.
Yeah, it's just more so how's your extension attribute being updated on the setup, I guess? Is that through that connector that you would create?
It's Jamf
array.
So when you sign in through Jamf setup, it gets the list of the app roles from Entra. If you have more than one, then you get a choice. If you have only one, it passes it straight through. Jamf setup is the mechanism by which the extension attribute is being updated itself.
Perfect. Thank you.
That's why you can do cool things like just change the EA and watch the device rebuild itself. Anybody else, or just shock silence? I think we're done. Thank you very much. You're welcome, man. A little sip from our sponsor.